an annotation. Now, let's move on to some of the major aspects of what it was like to be in Athens at the time. And I've talked about cultural context in lecture, so we're going to sort of touch on a bunch of the different key cultural contexts of ancient Greece and how they influenced what it was like to be in Athens at the time watching Oedipus. Before we get to that, what is Oedipus about, theme-wise? Just think on that for a minute. I pretty much know your answer. We talk about this in aesthetics. Everybody who ever talks about Oedipus talks about fate, obviously, right? That is a huge, important thematic element of this play. Oedipus had fate not on his side. Things went very badly for him. We're going to set that aside for this class because we're going to be theater historians more than dramatic analysis. And we're going to take fate, pitch it out the window for right now, and take a look at everything but fate. So, specifically, this is our perspective as historians. Let's assume that this play is something that the Athenians showed to visitors to demonstrate how great Athens was. And historically, we know this to be true. The City Dionysia festival happened at the beginning of the trading season. So when they're holding this several-day drinking and theater watching festival, not only are all the important people in Athens there, but all the important people from around the Greek peninsula are there. And possibly even non-Greeks are there in town to make trading deals. And hey, while you're here, have some wine, go see some theater. The kind of theater you want to show those people is the kind of theater that demonstrates that your town is the best town, that your culture is the best culture. Okay. Well, Oedipus is about this king who sleeps with his mom, gross, and stabs his eyes out, not good. And there's just generally a lot of awfulness in this play. How is this play a demonstration of Athens' greatness? Well, we have a bunch of different answers to this, but we're going to sort of dig through the cultural context of ancient Greece and try to figure out some of those answers. We're going to look at this from the perspective of Oedipus says, "We are Athens, we are the best." A couple of different things about Athens that tie in nicely to Oedipus. It was, in many ways, a highly, highly performative culture. Now, what on earth is a performative culture? It is simply a culture in which not just being yourself, but being yourself while playing a role in public is an important part of who you are. And this seems like kind of a weird concept, but I want you to kind of think about the different ways every day that you perform your identity. Not just in which you are a person, but that you perform your identity. And I'll say this right now, and make sure you remember this when you're, say, taking a midterm exam. Performative culture is not necessarily about theater. There were lots of theatrical performances in ancient Greece relative to anywhere else, but I'm not talking about the theatrical aspects of it. Think about the way in which culture today is highly performative, right? So if we say, oh, what does that word mean? Well, all right, politics are heavily performative. Any politician thinks about a rhythm and a cadence to their speech. They think about their hand gestures. See that hand gesture? The closed fist? It's not an angry closed fist, right? And it's also not a point. Politicians nowadays don't point because that feels demanding and mean, right? So, and this is actually a Bill Clinton thing. Clinton developed this sort of emphatic fist, and Obama uses it and lots of other people have. But that's a performance. I guarantee that in his regular everyday life, Obama does not naturally use that closed fist, and he does not naturally talk in the cadences that we hear him in his speeches. But nonetheless, that's a performance, right? Obviously, you guys are at least familiar with Jon Stewart, and Stewart appears to be himself on The Daily Show. And I'm sure to some degree he is, but that guy is also performing the identity of a sort of smartass and heavily culturally observant individual. He is that guy, but he is pumping up some of those values for a public performance of who he is. You guys don't maybe think about this, but you perform your identity every single day on Facebook. Your Facebook page and account and photos and albums and everything is essentially a curated performance of who you are as a person. What picture do you put up? What picture do you not? Because you've got an audience on Facebook. We don't tend to think about that way. We tend to think, oh, well, I'm just me on Facebook. That is a performance. And also, one thing to always remember is fashion is absolutely a performance, right? You get up in the morning and you put on a costume. Now, sometimes you genuinely don't really care what that costume is. Pajamas, jeans and a t-shirt, whatever. But there are all kinds of different degrees and extremes to which your everyday fashion, what you wear, is absolutely a performance. Hipsters, sorry about this picture, but it's just true. So, let's think about the ways in which the ancient Greeks believed that life was fundamentally performative. They took this cultural value to an extreme, way beyond what we were doing. Everything outside of your house is public action, and it is all a performance. Religious life, and we are talking about, in ancient Greece, we are talking about not just one church, obviously, right? Because we have the pantheon of Greek gods. You as an ancient Greek individual will belong to multiple different temples and sects that worship gods. And all of those performances or all of those actions that you do as a religious person, they happen within the context of a performance. Festivals happen in front of everybody else. So if you're worshiping a given god, then you're doing it out in public and other people can watch you. Sacrifices, right? Down in the lower left, you see somebody sacrificing an animal to a given god. That doesn't happen necessarily behind closed doors. It happens out in front of everyone else. And there are different roles and different robes that you wear and different approaches. It's a very self-consciously performative world. Your political life is also a performance. Now, we're very familiar with this one, per my previous reference to Obama, but political debate happens in public places. And so you as a politician, you demonstrate your intelligence, your wit, your sort of value to the community by performing the role of a politician out in front of the general public. And it is, like I've said all along with performativity, it's a role that you play. It involves a costume and gestures and motivations and all of these very performative things. So we've got a performative culture in ancient Greece, and we also have a highly competitive culture in ancient Greece, right? And as you can see from my images here, we are deeply familiar with the notion of a competitive culture. So one of the deals here is, right, if we in Athens are trying to say we're the best, how do we know that we're the best? It's because all the time in Athens, we work to figure out who of our individuals are the best of the best. War is a huge part of determining the best of the best. Here's just one example. You guys are maybe possibly familiar with the Peloponnesian War. That was the war where Athens and Sparta vied for dominance of the Greek peninsula, right? Athens and Sparta fought. You want to talk about war as a means of cultural competition? It's absolutely what it is. War is fundamentally one culture saying, we're better than you are. The Peloponnesian War went on for just under 30 years. That's how long those two cultures fought to prove that we are the best. So we don't tend to think of war as a means of cultural expression, but it absolutely is. Sport was a tremendous deal, right? Obviously, you guys know about ancient Greece and the whole business with the Olympics, but they also had all kinds of other sports beyond the Olympics. You see down there on the left, there's cockfighting. My rooster can kill your rooster? What does that have to do with anything? But from a competitive standpoint, the ancient Greeks found that that was tremendously important. Down in the bottom right, you see wrestling. The Greeks also did a lot of just general like gladiatorial events. Basically, early events that were like boxing and mixed martial arts, frequently to the death. Now, they didn't go quite as far as the Romans. The Romans did everything bigger and bloodier than the Greeks did. We'll talk about that later. But the idea here is it's not just about being Athenian, it's about being the best of the Athenians, which demonstrates that Athens is the best. Tragedy. It's not that just we have the City Dionysia play contest, it's that we have a winner. We vote on the winner. So there is the notion of, right, the best play. It's not just here are some good plays, it's here are some good plays and we're going to pick the best one. And then debate. If you've ever read any Athenian ancient Greek texts about anything, the Greeks talked and debated about stuff all the time. Philosophy was a hugely important thing to them, obviously, but it wasn't just somebody said, here's an idea, and everybody else said yes. It's all about debate and who can prove their argument in the clearest way. So we've got this notion of a performative culture and a competitive culture. We're going to talk about these two different things in terms of how we see them reflected in Oedipus. Those values, performativity and competition, are shown in Oedipus to be excellent. And again, here is Athens with this play demonstrating we are Athens, we are the best. So provide me with a little annotation here that talks about the way in which these values are fundamentally excellent. And we'll get into this in more group discussion when we talk about it in class. In addition to performativity and competition, we've got to talk about the democratic and participatory nature of Greek culture. We have this fantastic idea in ancient Greece that the world should be a democracy, that rather than being ruled by a dictator or a king, which is every other society before ancient Greece, and here's an old Renaissance image of Greek democracy in action, that in fact, people should be able to decide their own fate politically for themselves by voting, which is amazing. Now, we got to put a couple of giant asterisks on this notion that yay-rah democracy in ancient Greece, and it was all fantastic. First of all, you had to be a man. Sorry, women. And this will be a recurring theme throughout the course of the semester. Sorry, women, society does not treat you fairly. Also, you can't be a slave. Right, exactly. Ancient Greece, this wonderful progressive thinking democratic culture, they believed in slavery. So that's kind of a problem as well, right? Also, if you wanted to attend the assembly, which is basically the Congress, right? If you wanted to attend the assembly and vote, you had to pay. So that cut out a lot of people who didn't have the money to pay. And what ended up happening was about 25% attended. Nonetheless, there is in ancient Greece a clear culture of enfranchisement. You as the individual matter. Well, some of you individuals matter. And it is your job to go vote. How many of you listening to this lecture right now voted in the last presidential election? Age may have been an issue there, right? How many people voted in the last local election? Do you participate in the democratic exercises that take place in your community? Probably you don't. The ancient Greeks believed that that was your obligation as a human being to participate, and that was a really advanced thought for the era. So this is a place where the government respects the will of the people, most of the people, some of the people, and requires those people to participate in the actions and decisions of the community. In addition to that, one of the things the Greeks did better than anybody else in history at this point, with a handful of exceptions, is they organized and structured their culture around bureaucracy. Now, what do you think of when you think of bureaucracy? You think of red tape and paperwork and having to fill out forms and all this other crap, right? Zooming out a little bit, and yes, certainly, especially in modern life, bureaucracy is a really big deal and kind of a headache and a hassle. Anybody who's dealt with, I don't know, student loan forms or signing up for classes or, God forbid, taxes, recognizes that paperwork and bureaucracy can be a huge hassle. But if you zoom out a little bit and say, how do you organize a society? A lot of societies before now were not terribly well organized. There was an emperor at the top and everybody else kind of figured it out, right? Emperor, army, soldiers, do what I say, you get killed. That's pretty much it. One of the things the Greeks did really well is they structured their society. So you have a hierarchy. You have rulers at the top. You have sub-rulers under them. You can imagine the way in which the government was structured so that it flowed thoughtfully and bureaucratically. Here is one visual example. I went poking around and found a scholarly document from someone who had created a visual organization of how the Athenian government worked. Now, you don't need to know this. Just take a look at it, though, and look at the staggering complexity of which committees and groups and organizations answer to which other committees and groups, how the individuals are involved, how the larger population is involved, what responsibilities are, what the outcomes are. It's absurdly complicated. This was 2,400 years ago. So what the Athenians basically believed is, hey, look, there's a process for everything. There's a way to go about doing government and a way to go about organizing the world so that it is controlled and that it makes sense. So when we think about these two cultural contexts, democratic and participatory culture, it's your job to vote and be involved and participate in the community. And in that first bullet point, the people control the government. The government answers to the people. And then we talk about this notion of highly organized, thoughtful, hierarchical, structured government. These are really big deals that Oedipus demonstrates really, really well. Again, we tend to think of this play as being about fate. Throw that one out the window. It's being about sleeping with your mom, gross, and about stabbing your eyes out. But I would argue that Oedipus is highly representative of the impressively organized, participatory, democratic culture of Athens. provide me with a little bit of an annotation here to answer that question, and or come to class ready to talk about it